Being too available is one of the fastest ways to lose someone's interest. Not because people want to be treated badly, not because you should play games or pretend you don't care, but because of something deeply wired into human psychology that responds to effort, uncertainty, and the feeling of choosing rather than being chosen. Today, we are decoding all of it, the science, the real-life application, and exactly where the line is between being lovingly present and accidentally suffocating something before it has had a chance to grow. Before we begin, please subscribe to ensure that you never miss out on any of my videos. With that being said, let's get right in. I want to start with something important, because I think this topic gets mishandled almost every time it is discussed. Being too available is not a character flaw. It is not evidence that you are needy or weak or bad at dating. It is what happens when a good person applies relationship mode behavior to attraction stage dynamics, and those two things operate by different rules. In an established relationship, in a committed, mutual, secure connection, consistency, reliability, and constant availability are genuinely good things. They build trust. They build safety. They are the quiet foundations of lasting love. The problem is that we are often taught these qualities as universally attractive at every stage, and they are not. In the early stages of attraction, before anything is established, before there is a real shared history, before the connection has been earned through time and experience, these same qualities can communicate something that works against you. So before you feel bad about any of this, know that what we are talking about is not you being a bad person. It is you being a good person in the wrong context, at the wrong stage, without the information you needed to calibrate differently. That information is what this video is for. Let's start with the psychology. Why does too much availability reduce attraction? What is actually happening in the other person's mind? The first mechanism is what economists call perceived scarcity, and what psychologists have documented in the context of relationships as perceived value. The basic principle is this: we tend to assign more value to things that are not easily obtained than to things that are readily available. This is not a cynical observation about human nature. It is a deeply wired cognitive heuristic that evolved for good reasons. If something is rare, it is usually worth paying attention to. If something is everywhere, it probably requires less urgent investment. Applied to early attraction, this means when you are immediately and completely available to someone who has not yet invested significantly in you, the implicit message your behavior sends is not, "I am a giving, caring person." The implicit message is, "I am easy to have." And things that are easy to have are, by the unfortunate logic of this cognitive shortcut, things the brain does not assign high value to. Not because you are not valuable, but because the signal your behavior is sending is not telling the story of your value accurately. This is painful to hear. I know that, because the intention behind your availability is warmth and genuine care. But intention does not control perception. Behavior does. And the behavior of being instantly, completely, consistently available in the early stages of a connection communicates something about perceived value that works against the attraction you are trying to build.
The second mechanism is intermittent reinforcement. And this one is worth understanding deeply because it explains one of the most frustrating patterns in modern dating. Intermittent reinforcement is a term from behavioral psychology that refers to a reward schedule where a desired response is reinforced unpredictably rather than consistently. Research going back to B.F. Skinner in the mid-20th century shows that this pattern, reward sometimes, not always, on no predictable schedule, produces the most persistent and resistant behavior. The subject keeps trying and keeps trying and keeps trying because the reward might come at any moment. The uncertainty itself drives the pursuit. In the context of attraction, This is why inconsistent people feel so compelling. The person who is sometimes warm and sometimes withdrawn, sometimes deeply engaged and sometimes inexplicably distant, sometimes responsive and sometimes gone. Their behavior creates a state of low-grade uncertainty in the person who is interested in them. And that uncertainty produces something that feels, physiologically, a great deal like intense attraction. The brain is activated. Thinking is dominated by the question of what is happening, what they think, what will happen next. It feels like passion. It feels like chemistry. But what it actually is, much of the time, is the neurological response to not knowing. The consistently available person produces the opposite effect. There is no uncertainty. There is no activation. The brain is not fired up trying to solve anything. And in the absence of that activation, what the consistently available person offers, warmth, reliability, genuine care, can feel, by unfortunate contrast, like calm, like comfort, like the absence of excitement. I want to say clearly, this is a feature of early attraction, not of love. Real, enduring love is built on exactly the qualities that feel boring in this early stage. But understanding this mechanism helps you understand why the good, genuine, available person so often finishes second to the exciting, inconsistent one in the early stages, and what you can do about it without becoming the inconsistent person. The third mechanism is what I want to spend the most time on because it is the one that is most useful and most misunderstood. Being too available in the early stages of attraction is almost always a symptom of something specific. Your emotional investment in this person has outpaced the actual development of the connection. You are feeling and giving at a level that the relationship has not yet earned. And the other person, who is at a different stage of investment, experiences your behavior not as the natural expression of a well-founded connection, but as a level of need that the situation does not yet justify. This is not a criticism of your feelings. Feelings do not arrive on schedule. You can genuinely, strongly care about someone after a very short time, and that caring can be entirely real and entirely appropriate. The problem is not the feeling. The problem is when the feeling drives behavior that is more appropriate to a stage the relationship has not yet reached. When someone is texting you back once for every 3 messages you send, they are not in the same place you are, and no amount of sending more messages will close that gap. In fact, it will almost always widen it, because your escalating investment in the face of their lower investment signals something that is genuinely unattractive in the early stages, that your emotional equilibrium depends on their response, that you need something from them to feel okay. And that need, however understandable, creates an asymmetry that makes continued engagement feel more like obligation than desire.
So what do you actually do? Because be less available as advice is almost useless without understanding what that means in practice and why. The first thing is to match investment. Not precisely, not mathematically, but broadly. If someone is giving you a certain level of energy and engagement, your default should be to return roughly that level rather than significantly exceeding it. This is not withholding, this is calibrating. It keeps the dynamic reciprocal rather than lopsided. And a reciprocal dynamic is one in which both people are genuinely choosing each other, rather than one person filling the space vacated by the other's lesser investment. The second thing is to stop making yourself the most available thing in someone's life before they have done anything to deserve that position. This does not mean being cold or playing hard to get. It means having a life that is genuinely full enough that you are not always available, because you actually have things happening, friends to see, projects to pursue, interests that have nothing to do with the person you are interested in, not as a strategy to seem desirable, as the actual texture of a life well lived. The person whose life is genuinely full is naturally less available, and that natural unavailability does not feel like a game to the person on the other side. It feels like someone who has a real life, someone whose time is genuinely valuable because they spend it on things that matter to them. And someone whose time feels valuable is someone whose attention feels like a gift rather than a given. The third thing, and this is the one that changes everything when people actually apply it, is to become comfortable with not knowing. The behavior of overavailability is almost always driven by anxiety, the need to close uncertainty, the discomfort of not knowing where you stand, what they think, whether the connection is still there, and the attempt to resolve that discomfort by sending the message, by checking in, by creating contact that proves you are still relevant to them. But every time you act from that anxiety, you do two things. You send a message that communicates your need for reassurance, and you rob yourself of the chance to simply sit with uncertainty and discover that you are okay without constant contact, that you do not require someone else's attention to feel stable, that your sense of your own worth does not hinge on whether their replies come quickly. That discovery, that you are genuinely okay without the constant connection, is not just emotionally healthier, it is magnetically attractive. Because the person who does not need reassurance is the person who does not need to be reassured. They can receive someone else's interest without clutching at it. They can be warmly, genuinely present without being desperate. And that combination, warm presence without desperation, is one of the most compelling dynamics in early attraction.
I want to draw an important distinction before we close, because this topic is easily misused. There is a version of Be Less Available that is honest, healthy, and genuinely attractive. And there is a version that is manipulation. The difference is intention. The healthy version says, I am going to invest my energy at a level that reflects the actual stage of this connection. I am going to maintain my own life and my own sense of self rather than pouring everything into someone who is not yet committed to anything. I am going to tolerate the uncertainty of early connection without trying to frantically resolve it. And I am going to let this develop at a pace that is genuine, rather than one driven by my anxiety. The manipulative version says, I am going to artificially withhold myself to manufacture desire. I am going to pretend not to care so they care more. I am going to use scarcity as a tool to create a feeling that would not otherwise be there. The first version is sustainable. It builds something real. It comes from a grounded, secure place, and it attracts from that same place. The second version is exhausting to maintain, tends to attract people who respond well to games, and falls apart the moment the performance does. You do not need to be the second version. You only need to genuinely invest in yourself enough that the first version happens naturally. The goal is not to seem less available. It is to actually be less available, because your life is full, your sense of self is intact, and your interest in someone, however genuine, does not override all of that. 3 mechanisms, 3 things to do, and 1 distinction that determines whether any of this builds something worth having. Perceived scarcity shapes perceived value. Calibrate your availability to reflect the actual stage of the connection, not the stage you wish you were at. Intermittent reinforcement drives intensity, but intensity is not love. Do not manufacture inconsistency, but do not be so predictably constant that you remove all discovery from the dynamic. And over-availability is almost always a symptom of outpaced investment. The cure is not to suppress your feelings, but to invest them in yourself and your own life at a level that keeps you whole and genuinely compelling. You are not trying to be hard to get, you are trying to be worth getting. Those 2 things feel similar from the outside, but they come from completely different places, and only one of them builds attraction that is real, sustainable, and worthy of the person you actually are. That's Love Decoded. Drop a comment below. Have you ever experienced this, given someone everything and watched them pull away? Tell me what happened.
I read every single comment, and this one is going to have some powerful stories in it. If this gave you something real to work with, subscribe. We release a new video every week that decodes the parts of attraction and love that most people figure out the hard way, long after they needed to know. Share this with someone who is in this situation right now, and I will see you in the next one.